My name is Dylan Farmer. I work at the Center on Research and Evaluation at SMU in Dallas, Texas, and we work very closely with Dallas ISD Early Learning. Right now we're in the third year of our partnership with them. We also work with other groups around the state of Texas. Some of them are here, Region 10. Is anyone else? I'm trying to scan the room and see if there's anybody else that works with us here. Was anyone in our session last year Interact in Austin? Anybody? Except for Dallas ISD people. Okay. We'll give you an intro of our partnership, but what we want today to be more than anything is a conversation about data. We've accrued a lot of data over the course of 3 years. For today, we're going to focus only on class data. We've started to do some work to relate class data to student outcomes as well, but we're not going to get into that too much today. And we're also going to try to keep it pretty high level and not get too in the weeds. So as researchers, we like to get very, very technical and very robust with our analysis, but we're not going to do that today. We're going to keep it pretty high level. So because Dallas ISD has been doing this work in pre-K through second grade and for 3 years, and because the district is so big and so diverse, we have a lot of different ways to slice and dice the data. So going beyond just looking at the averages, but looking at different subgroups of students in classrooms, how classrooms are defined by the students in them, but also how classrooms are defined by the teachers and the experience that they have. So those are the kind of dives that we're going to do. We want this to be a conversation more than anything and really model what a research practice partnership is, we think. We're researchers, we're evaluators, but we think we have a pretty good gig in that all of the work that we do, all the research and evaluation work that we do, is embedded in a partnership, either with a school district or a state agency or a nonprofit organization. So all the work that we do is very driven by their needs and their ideas. So it's a good spot for us to be in, and this is what we'll do today really is a reflection of how we like to do our work. We can only analyze data as good as the input that we get from our partners. And so putting that context around it and being able to really ask the right questions and answer the right questions and kind of dive into the data in a way that's going to be really informed by the context and by people on the ground doing the work is, to us, the best way to think about data and analysis and really dig in and try to figure out what's going on and use data to inform the work. So we're going to co-present today with Teachstone, and also over this time, I think it's kind of become almost like not official, but almost like a three-pronged partnership in a way, because we also work really closely with Teachstone, and we try to share our findings and share our results, and they sort of use us sometimes to, dig into things that they may be having questions about. So it's become a pretty dynamic partnership. So I'm going to do a quick intro on our work, and then Sarah's going to talk for a few minutes about data across the nation, so different data that they're accruing at Teachstone about what's happening in different states and different localities. And then what we're going to do after that is dive into Dallas ISD data specifically and break the data down by some different subgroups of teachers and just have a conversation. What we want to do is show you some trends. We have some ideas around what's happening. The district, there's folks from the district here, they'll talk about how they're responding to that and like the kind of questions that it brings up for them when they see these trends and how it's shaping their work. And that's it. Any questions so far? No? Okay. So that was the agenda. We'll introduce our work, and then Sarah's going to take the floor for a while and talk about the national benchmarks, and then we'll do a deeper data dive. The objectives for today, again, gain a sense of what the data is looking like across the country. Hopefully what this will do is really put your own work into context to be able to see what, a lot of sessions I've been in over the last 2 days have been asking for numbers. Like I hear those questions a lot. People want to know, like, we know how we're doing, but how does that relate to what's going on elsewhere? So it's really hard to make sense of your progress without being able to contextualize it. So we hope to do that today. We also hope, if you're not already doing the kind of deep dives and like looking at the subgroups and looking at differentiation in your data to drive your work, we hope we'll give you some ideas about how to do that and how it can really change your approach to allocating resources where you work. Okay, so this is a proficiency slide. So as Dallas ISD, we talked about this in the last session that I was in. Actually, I think we're somewhere between 2 and 3 probably. And I say we very loosely. Dallas ISD is somewhere between a 2 and 3. I think as a district, there's always, in a district that size of Dallas ISD, there's always going to be teachers where you're really at the baseline level or where you're developing proficiency. But I think as a department, you're very much, you've developed proficiency and you're going towards this area of systematically developing mastery. Again, we started our work 3 years ago. It started with a very simple idea that the districts wanted to implement class across the district. It's a huge district. There's over 650 pre-K classrooms, and then double that nearly at the K through 12 grades. We do the work in pre-K through 2nd grade, every single pre-K classroom and about a third of the K through 2 classrooms. And so we initially started by just kind of division of labor. We're a research institute in town. We do this kind of work. We had a long partnership, a long history with the district. They knew that we collected data kind of for a variety of projects. And so this idea just came up. How about if you come in and do all of our observations so that you can focus on the data, you can focus on the reporting, and we'll focus on doing our work. And so with that, we've been able to turn data around pretty quickly. And we have conversations like we're going to have today about the data, and then they actually do the really hard work of working with teachers and educators. Very briefly, our partnership, kind of the way it works, we're very much embedded in our local context. We have state policy, we have local policy that we have to adhere to, and we always kind of have to hope that it's just going to continue to go in our favor, of course. There's the innovations and needs of the district, especially related to early childhood, so that's sort of the ecosystem that we live in. But we think that these 4 things here are kind of required for a research practice partnership like this to really be effective. So trust and transparency, I think the people at Dallas ISD, these are my friends, like we trust each other. There's not like a us versus them mentality or a power dynamic at all. We're totally in this together. We have a very clear common goal. We have clearly defined roles. There's no overlap in our roles at all, which is very nice. And it's mutually beneficial. And that's a big kicker with research practice partnerships, is very often it's not 100% mutually beneficial. A lot of times the benefit of it really sways in the direction of the researcher. But in this case, for these to work really effectively, it benefits us because as a university, it's a big mission to embed ourselves in our community. So it allows us to do that. And then for the district, of course, it allows them to do their work much more effectively. This is our theory of change. As I said earlier, we really started as like a very simple, we're going to help you collect data and we're going to give it back to you, and it was a contract kind of work, like a service work. And now that work has really evolved into a research partnership. We know that we are sitting on mountains of really good information, and so we're ready to take that next leap into really answering some really tough research questions and taking advantage of the work that we have going on. So this is a very brief version of our theory of change, but we consider our partnership to be here. It's very much influenced by local policy and state policy. Also, just our community of funders and advocates in Dallas is very prolific and very involved in a good way. And so they're stakeholders as well. All of that sort of informs this massive machine that is the Dallas ISD Early Learning System. And Derek and Monica and Dominique and those from the district can talk more about that if you have questions about it. The system itself is comprised of principals and instructional specialists or coaches, the managers on the team in early learning, and the administrators, and they all work together to inform the work in the classroom or in the school. So it's a very collaborative effort between all of those groups, and the focus in the classroom is of course class, so high quality interactions, but also a really strong curriculum and an emphasis on small groups and centers to facilitate that small group instruction. And then ultimately how that impacts the student. So our research questions really exist in this arrow, in that second arrow. We're trying to answer those questions of what the mechanisms for change are. So we have class data, we can see what those outcomes are, but we want to know very explicitly what those mechanisms for change are in the PD system. So the coach does this with his or her teacher this many times throughout the year. What kind of effect does that have on class scores? And then in turn, what kind of effect does that growth have on students? So we really are interested in unpacking those. So I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, and
Okay.
she's going to talk about the national data, and then we'll come back.
Can you hear me okay if I don't turn on the mic? Okay, great. I wasn't sure I projected quite as well as Dylan did. So the Teachstone Data Project, one of the things when Dylan and I were talking about this, she said, oh, we're so excited to see the new national norms. But for everyone who's waiting with bated breath, we do not have new national norms. What we have are samples from places around the country, and that's what we're going to be sharing. And this project started because we received this question so many times. What are the new national norms? When are we going to have new national norms? And it really started with the thought, well, wow, we really need to start collecting data from sites around the country so that we can help people benchmark what they're doing compared to other places that are similar to them in terms of their demographics, size, et cetera, et cetera. And so, to repeat myself, we get two questions most frequently about research. And one is, what are the new national norms? And the other one was, how much growth can we expect if we do class? And we get it really, really pretty frequently. And the short answer is, no, we don't have new national norms, and growth depends on a huge number of variables. How did you introduce your project? How did you work for teacher buy-in? How did you train your coaches? How did you build your infrastructure? You know, what was the frequency, the duration, and the depth of your professional development? When did you collect data? Did you give sufficient time for your professional development to work? But we also, it was very clear to me and some of my other colleagues at Teachstone that if we said, it depends to everybody, that was not the right answer. That was not the right answer. So first we're trying to identify what class data look like from state and local programs around the country. We want to learn more about the effects of class-based professional development on class scores. There's a lot of information from research studies coming out of Castle and coming out of other universities that tell us what that looks like in a controlled research environment, right? We don't have that luxury. That's not what we do at Teachstone, actually. I think that's a better way of saying it. It's not a luxury. It's just our mission is to really disseminate research and figure out how to use that research to better inform what we do to help teachers improve their practice so that kids have better outcomes. And that's what we do. So we want to learn more about that. And yes, we are looking at research, but we're also looking at local implementation. So, you know, you'll see I've got a little bit of data got some data from Dallas ISD, but then also taking deeper dives and trying to learn, so what specifically did Dallas ISD do? Lansing, Michigan is doing some great work. What are they doing? What is Louisiana doing? So really trying to get a handle on that. Today we're really going to talk about what data look like because we've pretty much at this point scratched the surface on the second bullet point of how much growth will we see if we do class. And I always have to do it in air quotes because you never know what somebody means when they say we do class, right? And so our data sources include published research studies, federal, state, and local reports. We started with 30 research studies. They were the ones that were most obvious to us, and I should say we have a really very small team and a person doing this work. So we started with 30 research studies. If you're familiar with the outcomes paper that we put out last year, that reviews 140 peer-reviewed studies on pre-K and K3. So clearly there's a lot more research to look at. But we also have 52 state and local reports, which includes the OHS monitoring data from the federal review, but also we looked at every Head Start state profile. Okay. So that's what we were doing. And what I'm really going to do is just talk you pretty quickly through some of the things that we found. I'm starting first with my Teachstone, so if you're familiar with our platform, observers can do observations, enter their data on my Teachstone, and voila, we get this data. I should also tell you that all of our data is pre-K data. We have very limited data in toddler, and to date, no data at the Teachstone end on infants. infant class. And what you'll see from this data, this data has to have been collected between 2015 and 2018 because we rolled my Teachstone out in 2015. And this is through March of this year, so pretty hot off the press. And you'll see numbers that actually look pretty similar if you're looking at domain level averages to what last year's OHS monitoring data looked like. So emotional support, almost a 3, classroom organization, 5.5, instructional support tipping up over that 3, which is great to see because it means that there are some things going on. And then you can just look through and, again, positive climate, negative climate, it's looking pretty strong, and where we really need that work is in the instructional support domain. So not a big surprise. This is last year's 2016-2017 Head Start monitoring data. As Head Start people know, it's a random selection of programs. They went to 252 grantees last year. Emotional support, 6.07, so they got over the 6. Classroom organization, a little bit higher than what we saw in Teachstone, and then instructional support right at that 3. And again, we also have the dimension level scores. We've also collected, to the extent it was available to us, the ranges that we saw, and I should tell you that I know that Dylan has a handout with all of her slides. I did not have the chance to do that yet, but we are thinking about how we're going to get this information into some kind of a paper that will post probably both on the Teachstone website, but also in the community. Because I also didn't actually include all of the data we had because I wanted to do just a quick overview and give Dylan more time for that. So we have state level data from a number of states, Alabama, California, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, and Washington. Our criteria was that data that we were sharing for the Resonance Project had to be collected 2014, 2015, or later. And part of that was because if we think about the class landscape, how things really have changed earlier in this decade. And so we had data from 2008, 9, 10, 11. We thought, let's just go with the most recent. And you can also see we've got different data sources. So we've got 811 classrooms in Alabama. They're all public school pre-K classrooms. But in California, we have 851 classrooms, but we've got center-based care and family child care. In Florida, I don't have the number of sites, I apologize. QRIS participants. Georgia, 88 classrooms, all within their public schools. Louisiana, 7,283 observations. And for all you Louisiana people, Nasha Patel is not in the room because she's doing her own presentation on the Louisiana story right now, but she was incredibly helpful to us in terms of sharing data. And so in Louisiana, public schools, center-based, Head Start. Washington, 75 classrooms, Head Start, center-based care, family child care. And yeah, I do know you can all read this. This is more because, in case the screen is, this font is a little small. And again, these averages look pretty similar to what I've already shown you and what you're looking at.
Sarah?
Yes?
Sorry.
That's fine.
I'm Bridget Hammering. I can't look at charts like this without saying what we need. There's still a lot we need to know. But one of the things we do know is that you're going to talk about that?
Well, actually, that's what Dylan's going to talk
Okay.
about.
I was going to say that the way that the data are collected do influence the mean scores, even in systems that are tightly regulating, and it'll be great for you to talk about. I will just say, across a number of studies now, we know in particular that administrators are more likely to inflate their scores, and particularly that inflation tends to be in instructional support. So I just think it's important because I think it's easy to look at this and be like, wow, what's Louisiana and Florida doing? But and that's not to say that it's just more complex.
Yes.
And so I think that's one of the challenges that we have in thinking about how to talk about these data, are making sure that we're understanding the context in which they're collected.
And that's also part of what we're thinking about in terms of how we write this up for public consumption.
And that's not part of what we're going to talk about either.
Okay.
But I mean, you're talking about
like collection differentiation, like how it's
not data collection, but you're talking about how to look at data in different ways.
just like breaking it down.
Yeah, break it. You're right. So you're not talking about it. I'll also tell you that we're also working on some guidance documents to ensure fidelity of data collection. So we hope that can help some. And then I'm going to share just a few specific localities. This is Arlington Public Schools in Arlington, Virginia. This is their 2015-2016. Once again, it's looking pretty similar to us. What's interesting is that I often get questions because I have a background in special education of does class work in special education and what does it look like. Their data and for Montessori and early childhood special ed, which unfortunately is a very small sample size. I believe it was 17 early childhood special ed and 17 Montessori classrooms, but it looked incredibly similar, which was also true when we got the data from Arizona a couple of years ago. And this year's data, which we haven't finalized running it per se, or they haven't really. It looks, again, quite similar, which is encouraging. Louisiana, we have data from an urban parish, so I have pulled observations from an urban parish. And I'm not about to tell you which one because I can't do that, and I wouldn't anyway. So again, it's looking pretty similar. And then we really wanted to, when I was touch base with Nasha here in Louisiana, one of the things I also really wanted to do was to compare urban versus rural. And so we have that. The most interesting thing to me in this is that the instructional support was higher in this particular, in the rural side. And then just really quickly before I turn it over to Dylan, is that I thought a bar graph would be really nice. So the purple is my Teachstone data, the red is a Head Start, yellow is from Arlington Public Schools, again, a very small sample size. The blue is from Dallas. The green is the, is Louisiana. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm doing this. Louisiana urban, the key didn't transfer over. Yeah, Louisiana urban. The orange is Louisiana rural, and is yes, no, my Teachstone is there. Purple.
Sorry. It's okay.
Oh, it's Arlington, Texas. So, I'm sorry, Derek, but yes, that's it.
Virginia.
No, not Arlington, Texas.
Arlington, Virginia.
No, San Antonio.
This is news to us.
No. No wonder you went. Derek, I'm actually really glad you did that because I would have given the wrong impression. It's from San Antonio. I had to make this acronym of LAURA, so Louisiana, urban, rural, and then I thought I could remember San Antonio. Didn't quite work the way I wanted it to. And so when we look at this data, and this is actually a better segue into what Dylan's going to be talking about, is so what do we know from that data? Just in general, what can you glean from that data? Veronica? I saw you whisper.
Well, the things you said.
Yeah, exactly. I did that. I answered all my own questions.
And, yeah, how, there's not much variability.
Exactly. So we know that the data looks fairly similar. We're not seeing a lot of variability. And so the next one, what don't we know? Well, so Veronica started this off. We don't know anything about the variability.
Well, I would say it's hiding the variability within, right? Because those are just the mean score, so there's not as much variability across. Right. But all of those represent means where there's a ton of variability.
Right. Which is why we're collecting, why we collected the range data, but for the sake of time, I just don't have time to do that.
You need a whisker plot.
Yeah. Yes.
That'd be a good one.
That would be a good one.
Yeah.
Next year. And then, so there's things we don't know, and there's a lot of additional information that we don't have based on just looking at means. And that's part of the message I want to share with you is that even once we get those averages, there's so much that means don't tell us. And so I would also encourage programs as they're thinking about how do we fit within the national averages, really think about how you compare to yourself from the previous year. Where are you seeing growth? Yeah, there's just a lot of things to think about besides just fixating on the average. And I'll tell you the limitations to this. First of all, it's only pre-K data. There aren't that many sites. If you were paying attention and you know your geography, I mean, we've represented Arlington, Virginia, down to San Antonio, Texas. And that's it. We don't have anything else, and it's a pretty big country. And so we have a lot of limitations. So I'm going to share this next slide, and Bridget, bear with me. This will be okay. 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 So, much of this past year, I have been emailing researchers I know and talking to state level people and say, will you please share de-identified data with us? We really need de-identified data. And we originally had thought, until this morning, I thought that we would be posting a Google form on the class community asking people if they'd be willing to submit. There's a really nice, easy form. If you only have one age level, it won't take you more than 5 to 15 minutes. If you have multiple age levels, it would take a lot longer. But I found out this morning when I spoke with Bridget that Castle's doing the same effort. So we're going to coordinate, but people should be hearing from either Castle or Keystone something about sharing data. And I know the Smokey the Bear is a little bit weird, but is that please, you know, if we want to know more about what class looks like in the world where people are implementing class without, not as a research study, but in the real world with real kids in real classrooms and real, which researchers do as well, but it's a different world. We really need you, so please, you can help us out. This should really be the message. So that's my end, and I'm going to segue over to Dylan.
There's 30, so.
These slides will also go up on class community, so if you don't have a handout, don't stress.
So I'm going to invite all of the Dallas people, Annie, who's with me from SMU, just jump in if y'all have ideas or thoughts about anything. This is going to be pretty informal. So we have 3 areas we're going to look at today. But before we do that, first, these are the kind of averages of where Dallas ISD is sitting right now. This first chunk is pre-K, kinder first, second. The number represents our most recent number, which the bars here are fall 2017. So we're still accruing spring data right now. We're actually finished. I think we have a few stragglers kind of going on right now, but for the most part, we're pretty much done. But we didn't include it today. So for pre-K, for example, this is what Dallas ISD looks like right now. So kind of as of February, this is what we were seeing. And these numbers are really small, I know, but as she said, we'll post the slides soon. But this kind of shows where the district was at various time points. So for example, this is fall 2015. They were at a 3.02 for instructional support. And then there was, sorry, that's actually, fall 2015. That should say fall 2016, actually. 2015, actually, sorry. But you can see where the district was at different time points. And then also, I think one of the most prominent things here is that, especially with emotional support and classroom organization, the district isn't quite as high as they were in the beginning. And we've seen these ebbs and flows in not only in Dallas ISD, but in other contexts as well. It seems to be that emotional support and classroom organization start off high, instructional support starts off low. Then there will be an initial bump in those two. And while there's a bump in emotional support and classroom organization, instructional support will take a little bit of a dive, which it did. We can see we took almost like a 0.15 drop between the first year and the second year. But once everything sort of like got in place, things started to level out. And Principal Brown and I were having a conversation about this just earlier today. And I know we've talked about this a lot too within the team about what may be going on there, why there's sort of this initial boost, and then there's like a little bit of a drop. So do you want to share what your thoughts were around that?
I just shared that I think that once there's an awareness that comes about, and so when they're aware, it's almost a try too hard in the observation. The first time they're not really aware, And so the second time, there's a try too hard piece that the framework or the rubric actually rules out. And so what I attribute to, I think the rubric is really good, that it can see when the teachers are really over trying or doing things that they don't normally do. And so then once they finish getting their awareness and the nervousness out from that second observation, we see it kind of level off to where it becomes natural again. So there's a part right in there where I call it the know too much mentality. They really understand what classroom organization looks like, so they're trying to have all their materials there, or they're trying to make sure the kids are moving and doing this stuff, where the first time the observers came in, they were just being natural. And so then after that second time they see the drop, they're like, oh, I should go back to what I was doing, because I really did have a good understanding of it, and we see it kind of level off. So there's an awareness that takes a dip, and then it comes back up.
So, we're gonna, now that we've sort of looked at the averages, what we're gonna do now is dive into 3 sort of topics of how we look at data a little bit differently beyond just looking at the overall averages of the system. So, the first one, this is a big one. We presented on this, or maybe, I actually may have presented with Rebecca about last year.
All 3 of us did.
And we also have done a webinar. So this is one that I think from a systems perspective, and I've also heard a lot of talk the last 2 days about how you get buy-in from your stakeholders, whether it's funders or state boards or school boards or whoever it is who kind of makes decisions at a really high level. Talking about your benchmark attainment, so like how many of your classrooms or how many of your teachers are reaching a specific goal, very simply, like what % of them, is much more powerful, it's much more tangible than compared to us in this room who are very embedded in the class framework. So to us, a jump from like a 3.2 to a 3.45 on instructional support really means something, but that's not gonna mean anything for the most part to a funder or a board member. And so we use these 2 metrics pretty interchangeably. In some cases, we talked about averages a lot, and we like to see those really incremental upticks because they mean something to us. But also, we talk about benchmarks a lot. And so we'll do, I'm going to skip that slide for the sake of time. This is an example of how these 2 metrics, this is the exact same set of data. I think this is a set of bilingual classrooms from Dallas ISD. You can see in fall 2016 and spring 2017, I think this is actually bilingual classrooms, the solid lines, and the more fuzzy ones are gen ed classrooms. If you look at the averages, so very simply, not a lot of difference, 3.06, 3.14 in the fall, and then for bilingual, and then 2.49 and 2.58 for gen ed. It's very obvious that those 2 groups are different. It's a small difference. To us, again, the difference between a 2.58 and a 3.14 is huge, but depending on who you're talking to, that may not mean a lot. That same group of classrooms, to flip them into that other metric of did those teachers meet the quality threshold or not, which I'll actually loop back to in a second, tells a very different picture. All right, so you can kind of see side by side, this is the exact same set of classrooms, but it's just much more tangible, it's much more easy to bite off and make sense of. And it also shows quite a different picture of what's going on, because these numbers aren't really that much different on the 1 to 7 scale, but the difference between 20% of your teachers being at quality and 45, nearly 46% of them being at quality is very different, and that means a lot for different stakeholders. And so this is a really powerful tool. Does anyone here know or talk about the thresholds, very much the thresholds for quality? So there's been a lot of meta-analyses that have been done on research that uses class to predict student outcomes. And we use the threshold of 5 for emotional support, 5 for classroom organization, and 3.25 for instructional support. So those are our places where we say, at this point, the teachers are kind of cooking with gas. Like they are doing enough consistent, high quality work in their classroom with their students that there's a high likelihood that their interactions with their students is going to have a positive effect on student outcomes. So that's where we can kind of say they're doing good, like they're ready to move forward. And then below the threshold is kind of, we don't like to use the word low quality, but it's sort of like you're kind of at where you want to be or you're not, right? And it's also not a place to say, well, once you meet the threshold, like you're good. It's actually the opposite. it's kind of the interpretation of these thresholds is that until you meet the threshold, you're kind of way too inconsistent to be positive that you're making a really good impact on your students. But after you meet that threshold, after you reach that benchmark, very incremental increases in your quality have positive impacts on your students. So it's kind of like that's where your minimum is. Like you want to get there, and then from there, that's where you're really going, and you want to continue to make those increases. So those are the cutoffs that we use. Yes, ma'am.
How did you identify those as cutoffs?
There's several papers, all from pre-K, and as you say, so I'm not sure it's so much meta-analysis, but sort of looking across multiple studies. So there's now 4 or 5 different studies. They kind of coalesce around the numbers. In fact, those are the same numbers we're using in Virginia's expansion. It's not an exact science, but I think it is a very powerful marker.
And you said 5, and 3.25?
3.25.
Thank you.
And I've heard variation, and there's also, it's important to know that in your context, like, we can, I don't know if there's a way to share some of the papers, but there's like Bridget said, there's about 4 or 5 papers that are out there that study this topic, and some of them have come to a really solid consensus about what the numbers are. Some have been a little bit, like they give a range. They'll say, you know, within instructional support, it could be anywhere between a 2.75 or a 3.5. So pick the spot in that range that works best for where you are, right, for your work. So if you're really high performing, sorry.
I'm sorry, I was going to say is we can't share the papers, but if anyone's interested, they can email me and I can send you the citations.
When I'm thinking about that, I think that threshold might be a better use for research or for even just talking about quality in your community than maybe the national average. That's not something to compare apples to oranges. I'm still not sure what we're comparing it to. If we're just talking about our own, goals, that might be the way to look.
Another reason that this is important, so again, these are the pre-K domain averages for Dallas ISD over 5 time points from fall 2015 through fall 2017. Again, we like the huge increase between spring and fall of this past year. But again, it's, to some people that may seem incremental. And so if you look at these, some people may say, oh, those lines are pretty flat, they don't look that great, like what's going on? But if you take this exact same data in this exact same set of classrooms, and you look at the percent who are meeting the quality benchmark, it looks like this. So again, you have sort of like lines with like sort of increases. They're really meaningful to us. But this is the data that we share most often with the other stakeholders in our community, or that the team at Dallas ISD shares with their board. So this is emotional support, the percent of teachers meeting that threshold semester over semester. You can see these like beautiful increases, and people see that and they're like, oh, there's something really, really great going on with this group. This one is huge. Between spring 2017 and fall 2017, that increase in instructional support was really awesome to see. And then the last one, the pink one on the right, is that's our kind of combination. So if a teacher reaches the threshold or reaches the benchmark in all 3 areas, they get that extra 1. And so those are the percent of teachers who are meeting the benchmark across the board, and we would call them like full quality classrooms.
Let me add something. Hi everybody, I'm Derek Little, the Assistant Superintendent with Dallas ISD over the Early Learning team. If you look at the blue set of bars, which are instructional support trend, you notice that it was trending down, while emotional support classroom organization were trending up. And I would say from like a programmatic leadership standpoint or a board advocacy standpoint, like that was real tough to continue to convince people that like this is the right path, because most folks in a K-12 setting care more about academic outcomes than something else, and so this was looking like it was going in the wrong direction. But part of what we believed all along, and I think what this is somewhat confirming for us, is that we had to establish the foundation in the first 2 domains until we could get to unlock potential in instructional support. And now that we have 5 semesters to look back, it seems that that was mostly true. But if you see a chart and you're sort of trending down in one particular area, I would just say don't freak out yet. Ask some good questions about it, but it was important for us to grapple with that as we were looking at this data.
Well, didn't you just say, I think it's important too, that you were also implementing a new curricula?
We did. In the 16-17 school year, we implemented a new pre-K curriculum, which later turned out it's a good idea. Like, we implemented the right thing and we're happy with the choice, but we were surprised by the learning curve effect that it had on teachers, and so we saw that a little bit in the class data. We saw that a lot in our student level data, which again was another like red flag. Are we on the right path here? But now we're starting to get traction in both of those. The other thing I would say is, this is true, really, there are 3 ladies in the back, or 2, I don't know if they're all 3 there, who spend all of their time trying to think about an effective coaching system around this work, and we don't think we would have seen that spike without 3 years of coaching support that's been going on in those classrooms.
One more slide on this. I just want to kind of like talk about the concept here, and so those of you who are data people in the audience will totally be used to this, but this is the example of why that first slide, the one that had those smaller charts, this one, how this happens, and why looking at both the benchmarks and the averages can really change your story. So this is all hypothetical, but imagine that each of these charts, so this chart in and of itself and that one in and of itself, are a group of classrooms or a group of teachers. And the curve that you see is the plot of their scores. So say it's their average instructional support score, for example. And so you have a lot who are sort of like a lot of teachers sort of clustered around that average, and then they start to spread out into the upper and the lower ends. These 2 groups have the exact same average. Hypothetically, they're both at a 3.25. However, if you look at the way that the teachers are spread out within that group, and you look at the percent who are meeting the quality threshold that you're interested in, the statistic is very different. So when your teachers are very spread out, which this happens most often, like when you're kind of an early implementer or in your early initiative, you'll have more spread. And so your average could look exactly the same, but the percent of teachers who are meeting the standard or meeting the goal that you're striving towards overall is a lot less. So if you have something like this at the bottom where your teachers are more clustered around that average, you can say 80% of our teachers, for example, are kind of where we want them to be. They met the goal, they met the benchmark, but in that group over there, only 65 have. But if we had only looked at the average, we would have completely lost that story or our ability to say that. So this is sort of an illustration of why using those 2 metrics interchangeably is really, really powerful. So that wraps up that first topic of the idea of thresholds and benchmarks. So we're going to have, you have the same visuals in front of you. So what we want to do is just take a couple minutes, sort of reflect and think. And then after maybe a minute or so, I'm sure you already have some like thoughts or ideas, but just let us know, like, are you already seeing the same trends? Or is anyone in here using thresholds in the same way? And then, like, kind of, if you see these results, much like Derek described, like when they had that initial dip, like what might you do about it? Like, how do you go about telling that story or responding to it effectively? And y'all can start throwing out ideas for the sake of time, because I think we are going to run short of time. Any thoughts? Any feedback? Anything at all? Yeah.
It's like research value too. Just that idea of those benchmarks just changed the way I feel about presenting data for our next report, because not only is not telling the whole story by just saying, you know, this is the score and this is the change. The audience probably doesn't understand what that means, as you pointed out.
Yeah. And you don't have to explain like where the theory comes from at all.
But yeah,
This is our goal. Yeah.
And also I think it just showing the changing score, the emotional support and class organization, we're already kind of achieving quality. Okay, check.
Yeah.
And they dismiss it as like, no, you're still maintaining that quality in those areas. You can't have those without the other. And so I think it's a great way to present it. It just that it tells the whole story in the right story.
And I've heard another partner that we work with actually on the other side of the Metroplex in Fort Worth has said that using that, they didn't initially use that metric at all. They were just looking at averages, and she has said that it sort of it catalyzed the growth of their work, and they were able to take what they were doing in Head Start and expand it to the entire child care community in the county, from infant through pre-K Head Start space. And they believe that being able to talk about it in like just a really tangible way was one of the things that was able to create that buy-in and sort of the competition that was needed to get people to really grasp onto the work. So, anything else? Any thoughts? Does anyone from the Dallas team want to add anything? No? Okay. All right, we're going to move on for the sake of time. The second one is this idea of experience, and we touched on this a little bit in the beginning. And Derek also touched on it a little bit as well, but this is the idea that it doesn't make it. We would hope to see that over time there would just be nothing but increases and things would kind of perfectly increase. But we see with class these sort of ebbs and flows. As one goes up, another may go down. It's not necessarily true that a teacher with 3 years of class experience is going to be doing better than a teacher with 2 years or 1 year. So this is one of the ways that we have broken down data. So these are just pre-K teachers. The solid lines, I want you to look at like one piece in isolation for once. So these orange ones are emotional support. And so the lines to the right, these solid ones, is the group of teachers that are in their 3rd year of pre-K in Dallas ISD. So in effect, this is their 3rd year of working in the class framework or working in the system. It's their 3rd year of exposure to it. This group that sort of sits in the middle right here, so this one, are in their 2nd year of pre-K in Dallas ISD. So they've been receiving the coaching and instruction for 2 years now. And then this group right here that only has a fall 2017 score, those were teachers who were brand new to pre-K in Dallas ISD this current school year. It doesn't mean they were brand new teachers, it doesn't mean they were brand new to Dallas ISD or even their school, but it's their 1st year teaching pre-K in Dallas ISD. So what we would expect to see there is that the teachers with 3 years of experience, if we look at just this fall, they would be doing the best, and the 2nd year teachers would be doing the 2nd best, and then the 1st year teachers would be doing the 3rd best, but we don't see that trend. If we look at just fall 2017 for emotional support and classroom organization and even instructional support, we see the same trend. It's that 2nd year group of teachers. They tend to be overall doing the best. More of them are achieving that quality threshold than the other 2 groups. And so which didn't really match like what we expected to see or what we expected to happen. We thought that 3-year group would be doing the best across the board. It also makes perfect sense that the teachers who are brand new have the most room to grow, right? So this was an interesting, that's an interesting trend for us to see. Another way we like to look at this data, and I'll come back to this slide in just a minute, is to look at the spread of teachers. So these are like the histograms that we like to look at too, to not just say, here's this group, how they're doing, but this then takes those 2 groups and like spreads them out, right? So this top one, these are both fall 2017, all pre-K teachers, all emotional support, but this group up at the top are the brand new teachers, so new to pre-K in this school year, and this group down here on the bottom are the 3rd year teachers. And so again, like I was talking about with the thresholds, the averages are almost exactly the same. Like the 1st year group, they're slightly below a 6. That 3rd year group, they are slightly above a 6, and the gold line is what represents that. But if you look at the way those teachers are spread out in the 1 to 7 scale, they're visually look very different. You have a lot more teachers in this high experience group, kind of like way over in that 6 to 7 range, where you have the newer teachers are a little more spread out. And so this is, I think Derek has said before, like these histograms are his favorite thing to look at, because this is the same thing with classroom organization. The spread there, again, that top one, those are the new teachers, the bottom are the 3rd year. Very, very different if you look at it visually this way. And you have these visuals in your handout. And then the same, this is instructional support. So again, you have this sort of shift over of all the teachers sort of moving over like further to the right. So I'm gonna skip that slide just for the sake of time because we are out of time. But that, to me, that's probably the most interesting one, is this idea that the second year teachers have a little bit of a dip, and then, the third year teachers have a little bit of a dip, and like the edge really seems to be with those who are in like their second year of implementation or working with class. So let's take a couple minutes and finish on that, just like kind of marinate on that and think about like what you think may be happening. Do you see the same trends, even if you see them literally in your data, or you just see them sort of anecdotally by working with teachers or observing them in your localities, and why that may be happening, sort of what effect is going on in that. So take a couple minutes. Okay, any thoughts? Any reflections?
We were just thinking back here, and I had a little bit of an aha moment, and so we're kind of wondering, is it more of the teacher, or is it our specialists that are getting too comfortable with that relationship and saying, you know, we've had this for 3 years, and so we don't have to be as aggressive as we were last year and the year before. So it kind of gives us a perspective to say, are we, you know, making sure that we're stressing that enough with our specialists?
I also, looking at the data, think about in that second year, I think this really speaks to how class allows teachers to go from learning to action so quickly. And there are not a lot of systems in education where that can happen. You have to be an expert to do fill in the blank. But with class, because of the way that the tool is built, once the teachers have the knowledge, they can actually translate that into action almost immediately. So that, you know, that second year growth, that little spike is like, I get it, I can do this, you know.
So, y'all have any thoughts, like in addition to what Debbie said about maybe, could it be something with the, like the coaching relationship? That's excellent point, but any other ideas?
I was thinking that the second year teachers, some of it may have to do with the fact that the first year when you implement the program, it's the novelty of it, so trying to figure out systems and then psychologically being the guinea pig.
Yeah.
Whereas the second year you've kind of tweaked administratively some of the processes you're doing, the paperwork that you may be using, so it might make it smoother the second time around. So that group of teachers went into it with a little more stability in the system, because there was some kind of foundation.
Totally. But any thoughts as to why then there's like a little dip for third year? That's the biggest, yeah.
Possibly like intentionality and focus, because when something is new and it stays right in the forefront of your intent, and then you can kind of go like, okay, I think I got this, and then lose a little of that intentionality. And then the other thing we talked about is that sometimes, oh, people are doing well let's add something. And so you can't necessarily maintain the same strength and everything while you're adding something else.
Right.
So I'm thinking similar to what the young lady said at the first level. I'm from California, so we're just not getting into the ballgame. I'm New Orleans, so I'm totally impressed. And hopefully I can get the buy-in with our school district. But I'm thinking similar to the young lady who spoke about just the shock that someone's coming into your environment, you know, you got to kind of like a little defensive. So the second year, you know, because we have veteran teachers who were just now getting coaches through 360. It used to be universal preschool, now it's under 360. So we have the coaches for the second year coming in. And the veteran teachers are like, okay, this is my territory, why are they here? Because I'm a union rep in my school district. And so then the second year that they're comfortable, okay, this is my domain, you know, I'm gonna do what I'm going to do. And then the third year, complacency sets in. So maybe that could be what happened, you know. You're here, you're scared me, I'm okay because this is my church, but now I'm comfortable again. So that's what happened in the third year.
I know we're out of time, but I was told I can steal like 5 minutes from the closing 15 minutes. So, does anyone have any like ideas about then what to do about that? I mean, I think Debbie sort of alluded to it a little bit, like you're starting to like get your wheels turning on it. But what could? That's what we wanted to get at is like, opening up your data to see what's really, unpacking what's going on can help you be so much more intentional with your work. And so how might y'all respond to something like this? Like what may kind of do different, knowing that next year you're going to have teachers going into their 4th year and a new group of teachers going into their 3rd year with class.
Are they keeping the same coaches?
Sometimes, but especially in the pre-K.
As much as possible.
Yeah, just
I mean, there's turnover and stuff.
We would actually say, back to the slide that showed the instructional support dip, I say we ripped the Band-Aid off that summer. Like, we had coaches all over the place and we wanted to more geographically align them, and so we intentionally shifted people. And that was probably a tertiary factor in what we saw in the data.
So in our state, we haven't even, we have class data that goes back to 2011 for our pre-K classrooms, but we hadn't looked at it in this type of way because the focus of doing it was completely different.
Yeah.
And then about a month or 2 ago, I got a phone call asking to look at the trends over time for a certain set of years, but the intention was that they anecdotally knew there were changes going on and couldn't figure out why. And wanted to also focus on what additional supports for the pre-K consultants that they currently provide but weren't meeting the needs that kept getting missed in the data. And so it turned into what are we doing internally, or internally, what can we do better before we try and say, let's just go and help the teachers and not even realize that we might be missing something in our own coaching curriculum that we have. And so that's what I'll be doing in the next couple months.
Okay, anything anybody needs to say, otherwise we're gonna close up. Okay, I'm gonna turn it over then. We're gonna, there's one more topic, but we don't have time to cover it, so, thank you all for coming. They're gonna close out the conference, I think, for the next 10 minutes or so, but our session is done.